we took those 6 cards with the 6 separate stories and we put it into an envelope that on the outside just said, Betlock, Gems. Gems being a double entendre, both for the gems and the stories themselves. And we sent it to everyone within a 25-minute radius of his store in the conservatory in downtown Minneapolis, had a household income of over $100,000. This was one of the stories, under the heading, A Canary Made Her Cry. And it read, a leading Minneapolis jeweler had everything she could want, including a very strict European-bred idea of perfection. She would have given Torval and Dean a 5.9, when every other skating judge gave them a perfect 6. She found the heart of her anniversary gift in an estate sale in Switzerland, and she brought it to us. A perfect 3-carat canary, an intense, fancy yellow diamond. We took the diamond and then with tiny tie emeralds made them into ribbons that disappeared under each side of the yellow stone, like ribbons, and when we were done we called her and asked her to come in and pick it up. She arrived almost immediately, but she was too anxious to open the box and she left. An hour passed. We hadn't heard anything. Then 2, then 3. Now it was near the end of the day and we were desperate. And a woman in our store called her store to ask her, did she love the ring? A fellow worker of hers answered the phone and said in response, oh, I'm sorry, she can't come to the phone right now. She's so moved, she's still crying. In the next 6 weeks, 13 people, 3 of them carrying the canary story and 3 of them carrying other stories, waltzed into Fred Batlock Jewelers and walked out with pieces or orders for pieces totaling over $310,000. Walked Fred Betlock right out of the red and into the black and in his fancy new digs in the Galleria in downtown Minneapolis, and then subsequently right out of that and into his fancy new digs in Palm Springs, California, where I encourage you to visit him the next time you're there, because he truly is a craftsman. He truly makes great pieces, and no one on earth can better tell you the incredible power of storytelling and selling to your clients. That's all the world I knew in 1967 when my father and mother had the bright idea. I know what we'll do. We'll send him from here, and I'm going to get the scale right. That's Oregon, that's Miami. Okay, it is over to about here to Shannon, Ireland, where I picked up a brogue and where I began 11 weeks in Europe. And I remember a 4th fellow that I met, the fellow who taught me this lesson. Fellow I knew for only 4 days. Haven't seen him before, haven't seen him since. Jim Marinelli from Hartford, Connecticut, a second going on 3rd-year law student at the University of Connecticut School of Law. Father is a surgeon practicing in Connecticut. Mother lives in the Upper East Side of Manhattan. They're separated. Jim is a former college rugby star and is now playing club rugby. And I can tell you this and more about Jim Marinelli because I remember Jim Marinelli so vividly because Jim Marinelli made me feel so important like no one I had ever met before and like few I have ever met since. Jim Marinelli had an extraordinary gift or trick for making you feel important. About every 15 minutes in a conversation, Jim would use my name. So he said, you want to go to the Tivoli tonight, Harry? Or especially this memorable one, let's go to the disco tonight, Harry. Which in addition to everything else I've told you about Jim Marinelli, I've got to tell you this was an incredibly attractive offer. Because in addition to everything else I've told you about Jim Marinelli in June 1967 is provably one of the handsomest men in the Northern Hemisphere. And you guys know just what that means if you go with him to a disco anywhere in the world. 12 women gather around you, and pretty soon there's a surplus. How are we going to allocate these precious resources? Jim made me feel so important. I've never forgotten. I remembered all these details. 4 days, 2 years later, I'm in the Stanford Library and I pick up Dale Carnegie's book, still a great book. How to Win Friends, Influence People. Page 34, the most precious word in the English language is a person's name. Learn it, use it. What is it that makes us happy and successful? As it turns out, they're exactly the same thing. How do you play this game?
How do you sell? How do you thrive? How do you enjoy this work that you're in? How do you sell more and more? As it turns out, I'm convinced that the keys in sales and business and service and in life is exactly the same thing, and it all comes down to one thing, which I learned about 4 years ago. I found myself sitting in my library, and I realized finally after a life of considerable ups and downs, more on that later, I had finally reached a point in my life where I felt truly fulfilled and content and happy. And I wondered, what is it that had brought me there? And I realized that what had brought me there were three events in my life. And they all shared in common that they were the three great risks I have taken in my life. And those three made all the difference. Gail Sheehy hits on exactly the same phenomenon, the role of courage and risk in her book, Pathfinders, when after doing her book Passages, she isolated 13 people. She said to people of unusual well-being. She said, how did they get there? We'd all want to know. How did someone achieve that state? She tried to figure out, what do these people have in common? And she found out that they had virtually nothing in common. They were tall and short, smart and dull, handsome and not homely, every possible combination and permutation of person, rich and poor for that matter. But when she went back over her notes, she suddenly realized that these 13 people all had one thing in common. They had all, at one point in their discussions with her, said that they had taken one great risk in their lives, and that risk is what had made all the difference. You play this game with courage.